everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And tonight I'm joined by my good friend, Dee Piers, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends. How are you, Dee?
I'm doing great, thank you. Happy to be here.
Happy you're here. Okay, so,
I'm going to start sharing.
okay, and I'll share too. And then I'll start up with the first piece we have, the piece on transactional weakness and the balance of power. That's a very interesting piece. But let us do share first, especially on Facebook.
Yes. Oh, Steve's here. Hello, everyone. Hello, Steve.
Hello, Steve. How are you?
Just sharing around because sharing is caring.
Yes. Thank you, Dee.
You're welcome.
And here we go. So the first piece we have for tonight is a piece by the former diplomat and intelligence guy by the name of Alistair Crook. And the title of his piece is Transactional Weakness Tips the Balance of Power. Quote, hold to no illusions. There is nothing beyond this reality. Unquote, which is sort of a philosophical thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of implies that we can know reality in the first place. And the caption on the photo, which is a photo of Putin with a half smile on his face, kind of gesturing with an open hand. And the caption is, a U.S. Economic rebalancing is coming. Putin is right. The post-World War
Mm-hmm.
World War II economic order
Mm-hmm.
is gone, unquote. And I think that's a fair statement. I think it is gone. Going on, the post-World War II geopolitical outcome effectively determined the post-war global economic structure. So we turn Marx on its head immediately. Okay, the political outcome determined the post-war global economic structure. Both are now undergoing huge change. Excuse me again. What remains stuck fast, however, is the general Western Weltanschauung. That's the German word for worldview. For those who don't know, that everything must, quote, change, unquote, only for it to stay the same. Things financial will continue as before. Do not disturb the slumber. The assumption is that the oligarch donor class will see to it that things remain the same. However, the power distribution of the post-war era was unique There is nothing, quote, forever, unquote, about it, nothing inherently permanent. I certainly agree with that statement. At a recent conference of Russian industrialists and entrepreneurs, President Putin highlighted both the global fracture and he set out um, 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 he set out an alternate vision, which is likely to be adopted by BRICS and many beyond. His address was, from the point of view of metaphor, the financial counterpart to his 2007 speech at the Munich Security Forum, at which he accepted the military défi posed by, quote, collective NATO, unquote. I have to confess, I don't know what the word défi or défi means. It's a French word, but I never grokked that particular one. Putin is now hinting that Russia has accepted the challenge posed by the post-war financial order. Russia has persevered against the financial war and is prevailing in that one too. Putin's address last week was in one sense nothing really new. It reflected the classic doctrine of the former premier of Russia, Yevgeny Primakov. No romantic about the West, but Mr. Primakov understood its hegemonic world order would always treat Russia as a subordinate. So he proposed a different model, the multipolar order, where Moscow balances power blocks but does not join them. At its heart, the Primakov doctrine was the avoidance of binary alignments, the preservation of sovereignty, the cultivation of ties with other great powers, and the rejection of ideology in favor of a Russian nationalist vision. Today's negotiations with Washington, now narrowly centered on Ukraine, reflects this logic. Russia isn't begging for sanctions relief or threatening anything specific. It is conducting strategic procrastination, um, waiting out electoral cycles, uh, um, testing the Western unity, and keeping all doors ajar. Yet Putin is not averse either to exerting a little pressure of his own. The window for accepting Russian sovereignty of the four eastern oblasts is not forever. Quote, this point can also move, unquote, he said. We can interpret that, or the West can interpret that, I think, as a threat. It is not Russia racing ahead with the negotiations. Quite the reverse. It is Trump who is racing ahead. Why? It appears to hark back to the American attachment to Kissinger-esque triangulation strategy. Subordinate Russia, peel away Iran, and then peel Russia from China. Offer carrots and threaten to, quote, stick, unquote, to Russia. And once subordinated in this way, Russia might then be detached from Iran, thus removing any Russian impediments to an Israel-Washington axis attack on Iran. Primakov, were he here, likely would be warning that Trump's, quote, big strategy, unquote, is to tie Russia into subordinate status quickly so that Trump can continue the Israel normalization of the entire Middle East. Witkoff has made Trump's strategy very plain. Quote, the next thing is we need to deal with Iran. They're a benefactor of proxy armies. But if we can get these terrorist organizations eliminated as risks, then we'll normalize everywhere. I think Lebanon could normalize with Israel. That's really possible. Syria too. So maybe Jolani in Syria now is a different guy. They've driven Iran out. I doubt that, actually. Imagine if Lebanon, Syria, and the Saudis sign a normalization treaty with Israel. I mean, that would be epic, unquote. U.S. officials say the deadline for an Iran, quote, decision, unquote, is in the spring. Well, we're in the spring, almost in the spring. But we passed March 21st, so we're in the spring. And with Russia reduced to supplicant status and Iran dealt with in such fantastical thinking, Team Trump can turn to the main adversary, which is China, of course. Putin, of course, understands this well and duly debunked all such illusions. Quote, set illusions aside, unquote, he said to the delegates last week. Quote, sanctions and restrictions are today's reality, together with a new spiral of economic rivalry already unleashed, unquote. Quote again, hold to no illusions. There is nothing beyond this reality, unquote. Quote again, sanctions are neither temporary nor targeted measures. They constitute a mechanism of systemic, strategic pressure against our nation. Regardless of global developments or shifts in the international order, our competitors will perpetually seek to constrain Russia and diminish its economic and technological capacities. Quote, you should not hope for complete freedom of trade, payments, and capital transfers. You should not count on mechanisms of the West to protect the rights of investors and entrepreneurs. I'm not talking about any legal systems. They just don't exist. They exist there only for themselves. That's the trick. Do you understand? Unquote. Our Russian challenges exist, quote, yes, unquote, but theirs are abundant also. Western dominance is slipping away. New centers of global growth are taking center stage, unquote, Putin said. These challenges are not the, quote, problem, unquote, they are the opportunity, Putin outlined, quote. We will prioritize domestic manufacturing and development of tech industries. The old model is over. Oil and gas production will be simply the adjunct to a largely internally circulating, self-sufficient, quote, real economy, unquote, with energy no longer its driver. We are open to Western investment, but only on our terms, and the small, quote, open, unquote, sector of our otherwise closed economy will, of course, still trade with our BRICS partners, unquote. What Putin outlined effectively is the return to the mainly closed, internally circulating economy model of the German school, Friedrich List, and of the Russian Premier Sergei Witta. Sergei Witta was a prime minister during Tsarist times, and a rather successful one. Just to be clear, Putin was not just explaining how Russia had transformed into a sanctions resistance economy that could equally disdain the apparent enticements of the West as well as its threats. He was challenging the Western economic model more fundamentally. I think I would say that he was challenging the globalization model more fundamentally. Anyway, Frederick List had, from the outset, been wary of Adam Smith's thinking that formed the basis of the, quote, Anglo model, unquote. List warned that it would ultimately be self-defeating. It would bias the system, I think the reference is to the national system, the system away from wealth creation and ultimately make it impossible to consume as much or to employ so many. Such a shift of economic model has profound consequences. It undercuts the entirety of the transactional, quote, art of the deal, unquote, mode of diplomacy on which Trump relies. It exposes the transactional weaknesses, quote, your enticement of the lifting of sanctions, plus the other inducements of Western investment in technology, now mean absolutely nothing, unquote, for we will accept these things henceforth on our terms only, unquote. Putin said, and quote again, nor, unquote, he argued, end quote, but yet again, do your threats of a further sanctioned siege carry weight? For your sanctions were the boon that took us to our new economic model. That's a very interesting paragraph, I think. Sanctions, in other words, were an opportunity for Russia and not really a problem. In other words, be it Ukraine or relations with China, uh, um, with China and Iran, Russia can be largely impervious, short of the mutually destructive threat of World War III, to the blandishments of the United States. Moscow can take its sweet time on Ukraine and consider other issues on a strictly cost-benefit analysis. It can see that the United States has no real leverage. Yet the great paradox to this is that List and Witte were right, and Adam Smith was wrong. For it is now the U.S. that has discovered that the Anglo model indeed has proved to be self-defeating, and the United States has been forced into two major conclusions. First, that the budget deficit, coupled with the exploding federal debt, finally has turned the, quote, resource curse, unquote, back onto the U.S. I'm not sure I agree with that at all, because the budget deficit for the United States is really not a problem. And the exploding debt, is really not a problem either. Both of those things can be handled using the MMT approach to economics. As the, quote, keeper, unquote, of the global reserve currency, and as J.D. Vance explicitly said, it has necessarily made America's primordial export to become the U.S. dollar. That, of course, is true. By extension, it means that the strong dollar, buoyed by a global synthetic demand for the reserve currency, has eviscerated America's real economy, specifically its manufacturing base. This is, quote, the Dutch disease, unquote, whereby currency appreciation suppresses the development of productive export sectors and turns politics into a zero-sum conflict over resource rents. I think that is a good point, but I don't think it has anything necessarily to do with the budget deficit or the exploding federal debt. Because the federal debt is not really necessary. It's a policy choice to have the federal debt. Okay, and the budget deficit is actually a benefit because it provides the flexibility to cope with business cycles. Going on, at last year's Senate hearing with Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chair, Vance asked the Fed chairman whether the U.S. dollar status as the global reserve currency might have some downsides. Vance drew parallels to the classic, quote, resource curse, unquote, suggesting the dollar's global role contributed to financialization at the expense of investment in the real economy. The Anglo model leads economies to overspecialize in their abundant factor, be it natural resources, low-wage labor, or financialized assets. I don't think that's well, you can call it the Anglo model if you want, but it's even more the Ricardian model than it is the Adam Smith model. And it's certainly not the economic model that's favored by MMT. The second point related to security, the subject which the Pentagon has been harping on for 10 years or so, is that the reserve currency and consequently strong dollar has pushed many U.S. military supply lines out to China. It makes no sense, the Pentagon argues, for the U.S. to depend on Chinese supply lines to provide the imports to U.S. military manufactured weapons by which it would then fight China. I completely agree with the second sentence, but I don't see what it has to do with us having or not having the reserve currency. I don't think the reserve currency is essential for us, and I don't think that having the reserve currency is essentially destructive for us. Depends a lot on what we do with our domestic policies. If we want to subsidize, and develop our manufacturing again, we can do that. I think what Alistair is assuming here is that in order to protect our manufacturing base here, in order to reinvigorate it, we have to tariff. That is not true, because we are a monetary sovereign. We can subsidize to our heart content. And if the WTO doesn't like it, we can get out of the WTO. The implicit economic model of the WTO is the Anglo model. And if we don't want to follow the Anglo model, then there's no reason to remain inside of the WTO. Anyway, the U.S. administration has two answers to this particular conundrum. The first is to have a multilateral agreement on the lines of the 1985 Plaza Accord to weaken the value of the dollar and pari passu, therefore to increase the value of the partner states' currencies. This is the, quote, Mar-a-Lago Accord, unquote, option. The U.S. Solution is to force the rest of the world to appreciate their currencies in order to improve U.S. export competitiveness. Well, again, I don't see that the U.S. has to force the rest of the world to appreciate their currencies. Not necessary. I don't know why Alistair thinks it is. The mechanism for achieving these objectives is to threaten trade and investment partners with tariffs, there it is, and withdrawal of the U.S. security umbrella. I don't think we need to do the first of these things. Withdrawal of the U.S. Security umbrella, however, makes a certain amount of sense for us, because why is it relevant? to our public purpose to offer our security umbrella to other nations. As a further twist going on with the article, the plan considers the possibility to revalue U.S. gold reserves. That's a move that would inversely cut the valuation of the dollar, U.S. debt, and foreign holdings of U.S. Treasuries. Yeah, I guess that's what the one of the things the Trump administration has been thinking about. But again, from the MMT point of view, there's no reason to revalue the gold reserves or to turn to gold at all. The fiat currency model is perfectly okay to continue with. Is perfectly designed to handle any domestic problems we have, and furthermore, our trade problems. Well, we have to redefine those based on the idea that, generally speaking, trade deficits do not necessarily hurt us. It depends on what we have a deficit in. It depends on what our trade deficits are doing to our domestic industries. If we have the possibility of supporting our domestic industries with subsidies rather than tariffs, then we don't have to worry about trade deficits at the start. Trade deficits are actually beneficial to us. Okay, because trade surpluses are really losses, okay, of our resources. But trade deficits are gains from the productive economies, okay, of other nations. So trade deficits are not our problem. They're actually the problem, okay, of other nations who are sending us their goods and services in return for our electronic bits of information. Going on, the second option is the unilateral approach. And the unilateral approach, a quote, user fee on foreign official holdings of U.S. Treasuries would be imposed to drive reserve managers out of the dollar, okay, and thus to weaken it. Well, why the hell would we do that? According to Alistair, it's to weaken, the dollar. But from our point of view, we have other ways to compensate for a strong dollar. And also not only other ways, but better ways to compensate for a strong dollar. Specifically, we can subsidize. Again, not a problem for a monetary sovereign. Well, it is obvious, is it not? Okay, a U.S. economic rebalancing, is coming. Putin is right. The post-World War II economic order, quote, is gone, unquote. And I do agree with that. A rebalancing is coming. But I think the rebalancing that's coming ought to be on MMT terms, not on the terms that Alistair is outlining here, which would be doing things the hard way and spreading an unnecessary sort of austerity within our economy itself. Going on with the article, though, with bluster and threats of sanctions force big states to strengthen their currencies and accept U.S. debt restructuring. i.e., haircuts imposed on their bond holdings, it seems improbable. It does seem improbable. So bluster and threats of sanctions is, not necessary. We don't have to accept a restructuring of our debt because we can pay it all off. We can pay it off as it falls due without strain, simply by issuing the currency. Simply by issuing, the necessary reserves. We can do that in two ways. Congress can order the issuance, or the executive branch can mint 1 ounce platinum coins in very large denominations, trillions and trillions of dollars, and then but can use the reserves produced from that particular maneuver to pay off bonds as they fall due. The Plaza Accord, the realignment of currencies, depended on the cooperation of major states, without which unilateral moves can turn absolutely ugly. Yes, that is true, but we don't have to have a Plaza Accord. We can proceed, as I've stated, without any sort of accord. Who is the weaker party? Is the question asked by Alice there. Who has the leverage now in the balance of power? Putin answered that question on the 18th of March, 2025. And what was his answer? His answer was, of course, for Russia to create a primarily internally recirculating economy. And I agree, that is Russia's answer. It should follow that. And Russia should make sure that it is a monetary sovereign. That is to make sure that it always issues its own currency, that it does not borrow in any currencies that are not its own, and that it allows its own currency and its value to be floating freely on international markets. And a fourth element is that it uses its own taxes to drive the value of its currency. And if it does that, and it pays attention to its trade policy, it only trades according to public purpose, then it will create the primarily internally recirculating economy that it seeks. So that's that article by Alistair Crook and my take on that article. I look forward to it. We have 64 people here, which is very welcome. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, Sandy Day's here. Good to see you, Sandy.
Yes. Yes, I noticed Sandy Dagg's here.
Mhm. Steve. Of course, we said that in the beginning.
The Earl of Laurel.
Yes.
Steve has shared to some Facebook groups. Thank you, Steve. Sandy, of course, has shared. Thank you very much, Sandy. Neshoba Shomak Shuti is here. And he says, hey, thank you very much. And Sandy says, hi, Neshoba. Steve says, hi, Neshoba. Steve says, so many homeless with no medical coverage. leaves in the richest currency on earth leaves me very depressed. The remedy of that, of course, is Medicare for all, which can be funded in many, many ways. Things are not really funded by taxation anyway in the United States. We do not need to tax to move to Medicare for all. Or we do not need to tax any more than we're taxing right now to move to Medicare for all. Why is that? Because Medicare for all will result in lower medical expenditures than we have now. Okay, as a country, we're spending something like $4.6 trillion per year on medical expenditures right now. If we were to shift to Medicare for all, once it really got going, we'd only be spending $2.3 trillion on medical expenditures, and everyone would be covered. And none of us would be depressed because we wouldn't have so many homeless with no medical coverage. We might have the same number of homeless, but they would have medical coverage, homeless or not. Steve says, please share to grow the channel. Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate that one. Sandy says, thanks. Is all our gold still in Fort Knox? I have my doubts in this corrupt country. Steve, I have no idea whether all our gold is still at Fort Knox, and you know what? I don't give a shit. Back, I have money in bonds. Is it good? I just retired. Steve, I don't know what you mean by good. I do know that according to the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, all your money in bonds has to be paid with the contracted interest as that money falls due. So as long as we make Congress and the executive stick to the Constitution, that money will be good. Sandy says, congratulations on your retirement, Steve. Sandy says, hi. Lana says, hi, I am homesick today, but I can at least listen here tonight. Sorry that you're sick, Lana. I haven't had a chance to look at your latest message to me, but I will look but later on tonight after I finish the stream. Sandy says, hi, Lana. Sorry you don't feel well. Steve says, thank you, Sandy. I sleep in, laugh out loud. And the Earl of Laurel says, hi, Lana. Sorry to hear you are sick. Drink some tea for me. Drink some chicken soup, Lana. Steve Wolfbrand says, hi, Lana. And Sandy rolls on the floor laughing. And Lana says, hey, Steve and everyone. She says, yes, I sent a bunch of what I think are interesting stuff. Thank you, Lana. Steve says, Lana, get well soon. Yes, Lana. Get well soon indeed. Okay. We now have another fine piece, and Dee will read that.
Okay.
It's the latest contribution from Pepe Escobar, who was recently spent a week in Yemen while the bombings were going on. And he has, I'm sure he has a number of reports, but I believe this is his first one following his leaving.
Okay.
He's going to go through that for us
Okay.
as soon as I get to the top of the article.
And so here we are with Pepe Escobar, from Sana to Sada. Yemen during wartime, March 31st, 2025.
Yes.
Sada, northwest Yemen. This picture.
Okay. I'm not sure that's a picture of Sada. I think it might be a picture. I think it might be a picture of Sana. Okay, I don't think the paragraph at the bottom is a caption for that.
No, it's not.
Right. So I think that's actually part of Sana. But anyway, keep going.
Okay, it's 2 p.m. on Wednesday, March 26th. I'm standing in a deserted boulevard in Sada during Ramadan, in silence, surrounded by mountains. I'm watching a road sign telling me the Saudi border is only a 2-hour drive away. We had arrived in northwest Yemen, the birthplace of the Ansar Allah movement, in a convoy of white Toyota SUVs. Not really a convoy, actually a decoy, because they never rode together along the scenically spectacular highway for serious security reasons. We were a small group of around 12 people, east and west, who had spent the previous days in the capital, Sana'a, as part of a conference on Palestine titled, quote, "You Are Not Alone." As our gracious host pointed out, we, in fact, broke physically the Western Arab blockade of Yemen as the first group of foreigners to visit the country in years. Included in the group were former Iraqi Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi, Professor Ma Jilin, a wonderful man, and Hui, Chinese Muslim from Ningxia province and dean of the Institute of Studies of the Mediterranean Rim and high-tech hub Hangzhou. Top Malaysian researcher Amina Razid Yatab, who delivered a stunning presentation during the conference on the militarization of archaeology in Al-Quds. Nelson Mandela's grandson, Mandla, and Irish dynamic duo Mike Wallace and Claire Daly, formerly at the European Parliament.
Okay, just a couple of comments on that particular paragraph. The Chinese city, okay, is Hangzhou. Okay, that's the high tech hub. Okay, the militarization, okay, of archaeology in Al Quds, okay, refers to Jerusalem. That's the Arab name for that city. Okay, and also the militarization is extremely well known because the Israelis have been doing that, connecting archaeology but to the political interests, okay, of Israel almost before the nation was founded. And that particular tradition in archaeology has gone on there since that time. Okay, of course, the presence of the dynamic duo, okay, of Mick Wallace and Claire Daly must really have been a gas for Pepe because they are really a dynamic duo. Anyway, please go on, Dee.
We were told back in Sana'a to expect, quote, a knock on the door at 3 a.m. in leisurely Yemeni time. This translated at 5 a.m. with departure 1 hour later. There was no extra info. We traveled with only the clothes on our back, with no charge, for smartphones, no toothbrush, nothing. We only learned in Sada that we would spend the night in town with no internet whatsoever.
He must have felt absolutely naked.
Exactly.
No internet.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It took a while to realize why we were there at this particular time. Everything part of a meticulous security operation. There was no coincidence. The day before March 25th marked the 10th anniversary of the first strike on Yemen by the proverbial coalition of the willing, assorted Arabs except Oman, led by Saudi Arabia with the Obama-Biden White House, quote, leading from behind. Later in the afternoon, we would learn that no less than 45,000 buildings across Yemen, especially in Sada Governorate, had been hit in these past 10 years, and now with direct input from the quote peace through strength Trump 2.0 led Pentagon, which, as the Tawdry Signal saga revealed, launched a war on Ansarallah and Yemen, quote, to send a message. We saw the quote message imprinted on a construction in progress cancer hospital in Sada, whose financing took enormous effort, now flattened by CENTCOM's bomb only 2 days before our visit. We collected fragments of American bombs, some with manufacturer name and contract number, to be analyzed by the Yemeni teams. One unexploded bomb lay in the bowls of the destroyed hospital.
Yeah, just a comment. One of the bombs they found had a label of Raytheon on it, which
Oh,
I found particularly interesting because I live here, okay, in Ashburn, Virginia, and Raytheon, of course, is right down the road from where I live, very, very close. I frequently pass it. Anyway, please go on.
okay. So as a direct link to the 10-year-old war, we also visited the site where a school bus was hit by a Saudi airstrike in 2018. All 42 kids died. The evidence found in one of their cell phones amidst the rubble. They are all buried in a small martyrs cemetery. At night, I was told to expect nothing. Quote, knock on the door around 4 a.m. Some of us, in fact, expected the impossible, a face-to-face meeting with the leader of Ansarallah, Abdul Malik Badr al-Din al-Houthi, who lives in Sada Governorate, but that would have represented an unimaginable security risk, as he's now CENTCOM's number one target for, quote, decapitation in the whole of West Asia. Yemen, the origin of all Arabs. To understand the complexities of Yemen, we need to start on how the system of government works. It's like a triangle. At the top of the triangle sits the leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the younger brother of the late Hussein al-Houthi, the first leader of Ansarallah, a multi-layered religious, political, military movement mostly composed of Zayadi Shiites. Right below sits President Mahdi Muhammad al-Mashhad. At the other two angles of the triangle, we have one side the 9 members of the High Political Council, which must answer to Parliament. We met 4 of them. On the other side, we have Parliament, which in fact has precedence over the Prime Minister and then the institutions of the government, with primacy for the justice system. In Sada, an intel specialist told me unambiguously that, quote, the real set of power is here, not in Sanya, a direct reference to leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi. After a few days of total immersion in Yemen, all the power of the land and the strength and character of its people start to make total sense. The holy Kaaba was clad by a Yemeni, quote, tuba king. One of its corners is called, quote, the Yemeni corner, an historic honor to all Yemenis. Yemen is the foundation stone of all Arab migrations, from the first Semitic migrations through the broken part Sheba due to the collapse of the Great Dam of Marib the Queen of Sheba, incidentally was born in Sanya. To all the armies that spread Islam all over the world, from Africa to Mesopotamia, India, and Southeast Asia. Yemen was ruled by the two greatest queens in the Islamic world, Bilqis of Sheba and Awa of the Sulihid state. Pro- uh, Prophet Muhammad specified more than 45 authenticated hadiths on Yemen and Yemenis. In a nutshell, Yemen is the origin of all Arabs. No wonder tawdry Wahhabi upstarts wallowing in sub-zero culture and hostages of bling bling bad taste hate Yemen with a vengeance, especially since the Yemeni unification of 1990. Yemenis were the first to write in Yemeni Arabic letters, the letters of Musnad, the ancient South Arabian script. They documented their own history so it wouldn't be distorted in the future, as much as contemporary Yemenis document their history of plunder by the Western oligarchy and its despicable Arab regime surrogates. Yemen's intrinsic power is a tremendous threat to turbo-capitalism configured as Plunder Inc. No wonder the 10-year war, still in progress, has featured a litany of mobilized Takfiri thugs, mercenaries, corrupt interim governments, and a shameful UN-backed coalition designed to bomb and starve Yemenis into submission, as documented by Issa Blumi's remarkable Destroying Yemen: What Chaos in Arabia Tells Us About the World. Trump 2.0 represents a logical conclusion of the process in the quote, peacemaker's own words. These quote, barbarians will be quote, annihilated, as in the old way left for globalized financial oligarchy to plunder the riches of Yemen. Now is to destroy it.
Okay, this photo that we're coming on there, okay, is a photo from Sana. It's at the mesmerizing old city, and the photo uh, uh, was taken by Pepe himself. Okay, go on, please, D.
Fighting for Palestine, quote, ethically and spiritually. We are relaxing in the duaya of our hotel in Sanya, drinking tea and waiting for the daily televised address to the nation by leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi, when suddenly he entered the room unannounced. We were speechless. That was none other than Yawa Sari, the spokesman of the Yemeni Armed Forces, who, Professor Ma told me, is a superstar in China, actually all across the global majority. That was an astonishing security risk to visit a group of foreigners in a well-known hotel in central Sanya, as if he was daring CENTCOM in person, not virtually via social media, as he does it every day. Yah Yahasare shook our hands, delivered a short speech, and made his point crystal clear. Quote, we in Yemen have decided to take this position in support and solidarity with the Palestinians out of our moral and religious responsibilities. In a private conversation with Mohammed Ali al-Houthi, a member of the High Political Council and former head of the Revolutionary Committee, I asked him whether Yemen had diplomatic efforts with Russia and China. The response, in flowery Arabic with several metaphors lost in translation, and a profusion of smiles, was priceless. Yes. We were also privileged to spend at least 2 hours with Professor Doctor Abdulaziz Salih bin Habtoor, a member of the High Political Council, former Prime Minister, the General Supervisor of the conference, quote, you are not alone, and a towering Yemeni old school intellectual, Professor bin Habtoor is also the author of a must-read book, Undeterred: Yemen in the Face of Decisive Storm, with an English translation published in 2017 by the Language Center in Sanyas University. He told us how our small group, quote, broke the blockade imposed on Yemen for 10 years now, and how the fight for Palestine must be fought, quote, ethically and spiritually. Quote, foreigners think that the Houthis are larger than the resistance itself. There are indeed more people in Ansarallah than Ansarallah itself. In the soaps of Sada and Sanya, we routinely hear that, quote, all Yemen is Houthi. Professor bin Habtoor summarized Houthi power in three vectors: leadership guidance, quote, mobilization of the people, and resilience derived from history, and compared Saudis trying to fight us since 1967 to real Yemeni liberation achieved only in 2016. Houthi military power has come a long way from, quote, technical cooperation during the Cold War, top Yemeni students honing their skills in the USSR and China, and, quote, a good military connection with Egypt before Sadat. Professor bin Habtoor also remarked how Beirut, Baghdad, and Cairo used to be, quote, great cultural centers. No wonder they were all attacked by Western vultures and their surrogates. Now, the, quote, reference in the Arab world has been degraded to cheap, tawdry, bling-bling Persian gold. That complemented a sharp analysis by former Iraqi Prime Minister Mahdi, who extolled how, quote, Yemen has been liberated culturally and economically, self-sufficient and independent from the world system, although paying an enormous price. Former Bolivian Foreign Minister Fernando Juan Tucci, very close to Evo Morales, delivered the clincher. Quote, we are walking in circles because all development models are connected to neocolonialism. We, quote, need a new transcontinental model as, quote, we fight the same struggle in Latin America and West Asia. There will be surprises. Whatever the several stooges exchanging, quote, bomb Yemen messages on a signal chat crammed with CIA backdoors may dream of, Yemen will not be broken. Still, the Pentagon has dispatched at least 4 B-2A stealth strategic bombers in Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, together with the 4 B-52H already in the base, plus KC-135 tankers and C-17 transport aircraft as support. The Pentagon is definitely bent on inflicting long-term hell from above on Yemen.
Okay, perhaps. Okay, it's bent on that, but just recently, the Iranians uh, have threatened the United States, saying that if there are any attacks on them, uh, that they have the means to attack, the Diego Garcia base themselves. Uh, I talked about that on Saturday. I talked about the possibilities on Saturday, okay, and on Thursday, and I thought the distances were too great for them to attack it. They seem to think they have a way of doing so. Okay, and I'm not in a position to gainsay them. But if they can make an attack on Diego Garcia, uh, then it will not only be for their benefit, but also for the Houthi benefit.
Hmm.
Okay, because it won't be possible for the U.S. to stage attacks on the Houthis from there. No B-2As coming and no B-52s coming anymore. Okay, which also kind of makes me think the Houthis are actually closer to Diego Garcia than are, uh, the Iranians. So it may be possible that some of the Iranian missiles, okay, if fired from Yemen, it may be that they would uh, uh, be able to hit uh, 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 that base with greater ease than they can, from South Iran. So I don't know if any of that's going to happen, but I thought it's just something to consider. Please go on.
Only on Sunday night, civilian (italics mine) buildings in Sanya were bombed no less than 13 times. U.S. on-the-ground intel in Yemen is a joke. The Fox News clown, posing as head of the Pentagon, has ordered the USS Harry Truman, now routinely targeted by the Yemeni armed forces, to stay in the Red Sea for another month. The USS Carl Vinson strike group, formerly deployed in the Asia Pacific, left for West Asia this past Friday. So soon, in thesis, the U.S. Navy may have two aircraft carrier strike groups, with hundreds of fighter jets parked on both sides of Bab el-Mandeb. The Yemeni armed forces are not even blinking. On the contrary, first, they warned all airlines that, quote, what is referred to as Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv has become unsafe for air traffic and will remain so until the genocide in Gaza stops, de facto declaring an aerial blockade on Israel.
Okay, so this is a substantial degree of escalation by the Houthis.
Yes, it is.
They never did that before. In other words, their blockade was naval until now.
Mhm.
But now blocking the airport in Israel, making it unsafe. That's very, very important.
Yes, it is. Then they ramped up their UAV force attacks on several warships attached to the USS Harry Truman, even as B-2 bombers targeted an underground missile complex of the Yemeni armed forces with devastating bunker busters. They couldn't destroy it, only the entrances collapsed.
So that is very interesting, that they didn't have the capability to destroy the missile complex.
Mhm.
That's an interesting piece of intelligence I hadn't seen anywhere else.
In Sanya, it's natural that members of the High Political Council could not possibly reveal military secrets, especially for foreigners. But I did learn from a top-level provincial governor this past Friday that, quote, there will be surprises. Then neatly tied up with leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi on X, announcing, quote, there is an upcoming surprise regarding the development of Yemen's military capabilities that may surprise the United States. It could be revealed after its use, as actions will precede words. That may have been related to a senior source in the Yemeni Armed Forces High Command stating they targeted the E-2 command and control aircraft of the USS Harry Truman, with the aircraft carrier losing its command. So far, there has been thunderous silence from the Pentagon. Of course, no one expects Team Trump 2.0 to understand what Prophet Muhammad himself had stated unambiguously in the 7th century. Quote, faith is Yemeni. Law is Yemeni, and wisdom is Yemeni.
Oh, amazing.
It is. Nor will they understand the top two imperatives of the Arab Fight Club. Rule number one, don't mess with Yemen. Rule number two, do not mess with Yemen.
I thought that was a good way to end it.
Yes, yes,
Very
very good.
good way to end it. So that was an amazing trip, by Pepe. I mean, I'm sure as a journalist he was high as a kite all through the trip, and right now too when he sits down to write about it.
Yeah.
It's really an amazing journalistic achievement. Oh, and by the way, he gave a speech while he was there, to the million, uh, um, man march. I don't know how many times a month, but on Fridays, the Yemenis come together in Sana'a, for a million man march, and we saw the march, and it was easily a million people. It could have been more. They're just unending numbers of people in that huge column in the center of Asana. Okay, and Pepe gave about a 2 minute speech to that group. It was a real rah rah speech, and I'm sure he was really, really excited to have the chance to give it. And of course, he got roars of approval. The speech was given, okay, in English, a few phrases, okay, of Arabic in it, but mostly it was in English, uh, which enough people understood for them to really cheer very, very loudly when he made that speech. Anyway, that was an exciting moment from that trip. Now, changing pace a little, of course, what's been going on? Well, before I change pace, I think we really need to hit comments. We have a lot of comments. Sandy said, but yikes. Lana said, thanks all. Yes, tea is a thing. Appreciate your good wishes. Too many hours, not enough sleep, too much stress. After April 15th, we will go to PT hours. I just have to get through the next 2 weeks or so. Evelina says, they make bombs just down the road from you, Dr. Joe. I don't know whether they make bombs there. Uh, they certainly have a data center down there, and they're certainly manufacturing some things. But whether they manufacture bombs there or not, I have no idea. But the company is a major presence, in Ashburn, Virginia. It's a major presence in, many places, but it certainly is here as well. Funny how bombs feel far away, yet they are so close. The irony, the pathos. Yes. Rana says, breaking news, the Wisconsin Supreme Court candidate that Elon was promoting has lost. That is absolutely wonderful news because that candidate had all the money he could possibly use. He had a lead over, I think her name was Crawford, Susan Crawford. She had been serving on the Supreme Court, and they were trying, to unseat her. And it was a pure money move because she was a good justice of the Supreme Court. And to have them fail is really wonderful. To have the money, get beaten, okay, in that particular race. It was so important because she was the deciding vote uh, to keep the Supreme Court in non-MAGA hands. So the Wisconsin Supreme Court has not fallen but to MAGA, even though Elon spent a ton to have that happen. So that is really wonderful news. Now,
You get only six months before the government phases out all checks.
okay, Bonnie points out that there was some news that
It's an MSN.
according to Microsoft News, there are only 6 months until the government phases out the sending of checks to people. Of course, what they're going to do instead is
Payments.
Send wires to people for payments. This will not affect us because they're already sending us wires, but there are many people who still receive checks, and there are still 456,000 Social Security checks that are mailed out, on a monthly basis.
That won't be happening anymore.
Okay, so I don't know who determined that the Treasury is going to stop its mailing out of checks. Of course, it's probably Doge, but of course, Doge is not exactly the law. Congress can do something about that. They can pass a law requiring that the executive branch continue sending out checks to those who want them. Of course, Trump could also change his mind. Reportedly, Elon is leaving the government at the end of May. If he does that, then the power of Doge may prove to be considerably less. And news that appears now coming out of Doge, may not be what actually happens. I think it depends a lot on the reaction of the public. Whether there are protests about that.
Social Security may see interruption of benefits due to Doge.
Yeah, well, we've known that for a long time, that there may be interruptions. People have been warning about that for some time. It remains to be seen, if we're going to get any interruptions. But as long as Bonnie has brought up the subject, what I think is ridiculous is the plan to cut 7,000 more Social Security jobs and to phase out some of the offices in many states. There is absolutely no economic need to do that. There are too few employees of Social Security now. The 57,000 Social Security employees are the lowest amount of employees Social Security has had in a very, very long time. And as you know, the population of old people on Social Security here in the United States has greatly increased over 30 years, while the number of employees in the Social Security Administration continues to go down. And so there's absolutely no reason to cut out 7,000 more employees, except that Elon Musk wanted to say that his Doge effort is saving some money. But there is no need for the saving of that money. There is no need for any kind of austerity. We had to go to a Social Security office, I forget now if it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago here. It was evidently some time ago, but we went to the office in Fairfax, Virginia, which is close to us. We had a minor problem with Bonnie's account. It took them 4 hours to serve us. We had to wait for 4 hours. The office was too small and considerably understaffed, at that time. They cannot handle the traffic They don't provide good service because they have too few employees. It has to stop. More employees are needed for Social Security. There are no funding problems with the federal government. What DOGE is doing is, in most respects, an absolute fraud. It should be stopped. And it should especially be stopped in relation to what it's doing to the Treasury Department, the Social Security. And of course, it's avoiding the real center of any possible fraud in the federal government, which is the Defense Department. It won't go into the Defense Department that hasn't passed an audit in years. Why? Because defense is absolutely sacrosanct. What it does is it goes into parts of the federal agencies that are serving the people, and it tries to cut people, and it claims by cutting people it's cutting spending. It's all full of crap. There's no need to cut spending. There's no need to cut the people. There may be a need to carefully go through the federal government and see how performance can be improved. Of course that's needed, but it shouldn't be done with the goal of cutting costs. The goal should be to increase effectiveness in every one of the federal agencies. Cutting costs is not important. Cutting costs doesn't mean improving efficiency. That's not also the measure of efficiency. There are other measures, of efficiency, which have nothing to do with cut costs.
They're accelerating toward a check zero world.
Yes, I know, but that's not the subject of this particular stream, Bonnie.
Okay.
So we're not going to discuss that any longer.
Okay.
So there were some comments. Evelina said, also news, China blocked BlackRock from acquiring ports in Panama. Wonderful. That is wonderful news. Lana says mine is direct deposit, so is ours, of course. And Lana says, who else thinks Elon better watch himself? Luigi, ? Evelina says, yay, probably in relation to the election in Wisconsin. Sandy says, Luigi may get the death penalty. They mentioned it on the news. What they mentioned on the news is they're going to seek the death penalty. Whether he gets it, that's a different question. Lana says, Joe, same crap they're doing with the post office, the schools. Yes, I know. Sandy says, I think ours is direct deposit. Well, take a look at your bank account, Sandy. You'll find out easily whether you're getting a direct deposit or not. Lana says, people will say, quote, it's not working, unquote, so they have an excuse to privatize it. Yeah, that's what they're trying to do. So the money managers can make a fortune from the $2.7 trillion they'll get out of the Social Security Trust Fund. Of course, there's no Social Security Trust Fund. Right now, it's an accounting record. So what's going to happen is the Treasury Department is going to have to find $2.7 trillion actual dollars to give to the money managers. That's what's going to happen. Because right now, Social Security has no dollars. Lana says, Sandy, that's not why I brought it up, but they should rehire everyone. Lana says, people are getting really angry with Elon. I know. I mean, Elon is losing his auto company because people are so angry at him. Trump and Elon are getting away with all of this because people still believe their tax dollars are funding the federal government. That's part of the reason, sure. They believe they will have less taxes with what Elon is doing. Well, of course, whether they have less taxes or not depends on what the Congress, decides to do. But of course, the more important point is less taxes, but no services from Social Security when they have a problem and have to go to an office. I don't think they want that trade-off. I don't think they want that trade-off in all of the bureaus of the government. People want their services. They want less taxes, but they want their services. And when the services go, they're going to be pretty pissed off. Sandy says, I can't stand Elon. I can't wait till he's gone. Me too. I can't wait till he's gone. Elena says, the Chinese government said no. Yeah. Some that were let go were rehired. I was talking to one of the Fed guys that were let go. He said he was reinstated. I wish for all they're still cutting people. Yeah, what happened is there was a court decision saying they had to rehire the workers who were fired during their first, 2 years, when they were there on a probationary basis. The federal government had been firing them all, and they were claiming it was for performance reasons because that was the only way they could hire. They were able to fire them quickly. They had to give a performance reason. So they manufactured them, but they were lying about it. There was no performance reason. They just wanted to cut all those people. So the court understood that and saw that, and they basically declared the firings were not in accordance with the procedure of the federal government, and they had to hire back all those workers. I think there were some 25,000 that had to be hired back. Pam Bondi has called for Luigi to have the death penalty. Sure, but that doesn't mean she'll get the death penalty, does it? Lana says, Sandy, me too, ugh, he is a menace. Lana said, people who are cheering for what's going on don't think that they will be adversely affected. Just wait. I know people don't understand, the connection. So they're going to learn the lesson the hard way. I hope Luigi doesn't get the death penalty. I hope he doesn't get the death penalty also. And I hope a future president will commute his sentence. Lana says they'll make a bigger hero out of Luigi if they kill him. Yeah, they will. They will. They'll make a bigger hero out of him. They'll make a martyr out of him. Classic kind, of martyr. Okay, so now let's get on to our third thing for tonight. Times are fleeting. Okay, this is a piece from a video. Okay, this is Nima Wilkerson on his, Dialogue Works program. He has an interview with Larry Wilkerson. Okay, I pick it up at about 44 minutes in. Okay, I think, I'm sharing it right now. And what this is about is a possible pending attack by the administration on Iran.
I commend his desire to get out of it. I commend his desire to do comprehensively the right thing, but I rue his procedure, and I don't think he's going to be successful now because of that procedure. He just doesn't know what he's doing.
Okay, that was a final comment on what Trump was doing with Putin and the way he's, trying to negotiate a settlement. And Larry is saying that he doesn't know what he's doing because he's doing it in this way. He may fail, even though he probably truly wants to have a peace with the Russians. Anyway, we're about to go on to a new topic.
And the problem is that his administration is not that much wise to help him.
How to get out of it. I commend his desire to get out of it. I commend his desire to do comprehensively the right thing, but I rue his procedure, and I don't think he's going to be successful now because of that procedure. He just doesn't know what he's doing.
And the problem is that his administration is not that much wise to help him.
Nope.
And we know, Larry, I remember when Donald Trump he was choosing these people who are part of this administration right now. Everybody was talking about that the Trump experience, the experience he had during his first term, has pushed him toward these new people, mostly young people, to be part of this administration because he wants to manage everything, not getting order from the people. But the problem coming out of this administration would be they don't know about anything about the history. They don't know about anything about how they can help the president in order to bring some sort of sanity in terms of yesterday he was threatening Iran and Russia with new sanction tariffs, as he mentioned, and with bombing Iran. You know that Russia was under the sanctions, tremendous sanctions from the United States, more than 3 years that they were experiencing that. There is a fight going on in Ukraine. The United States is fighting. New York Times reported yesterday how much the United States is involved in Ukraine.
Yeah.
How deeply is involved in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And Russians know that.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised, Nima, that there aren't some people in Russia in the Lubyanka or other prison that we haven't told people about. They're American citizens. Later on, we'll let them know that they were innocent Wall Street Journal reporters caught on the street or something. I wouldn't be surprised at all. And I wouldn't be surprised that Putin didn't dispatch his soldiers, dispatch some Americans in Kursk. I wouldn't be surprised at all because we were in the middle of that. We were in the middle of it. Whether they were mercenaries or working for the United States in some way, I don't know.
When he uses the dispatch word, he's saying he wouldn't be surprised if some Americans were killed in Kursk.
I suspect a little bit of both. But you're right. And when we do something like sanctions, I remember a deputy secretary of the Treasury for whom I had a lot of respect because he was also an international relations scholar, in addition to being deputy secretary of the Treasury and an economist. Really smart man. I remember him telling me, do you know, Larry, we are so deep into sanctions at OFAC, Office of Financial Assets Control, which monitors our sanctions regime, that it would take a decade to unwind them. If the Congress were to suddenly say no more sanctions and unwind the ones that exist, it would take us 10 years to unwind them. There's such a labyrinth there. That's us. That's the way we do business. And there's no reason for about half those sanctions. No reason whatsoever.
Okay, if that's true, it's really terrible news because, of course, for peace across the world, we have to get rid of the sanctions. We have to change our foreign policy. We have to develop a collaborative foreign policy. By the way, most of these sanctions, are unilateral sanctions. According to international law, they are illegal.
If we're going to get out of this in any way, fashion, or form that leaves the empire in anything but a few tatters rather than utterly on its way down, then he's going to have a new team. There's no doubt in my mind about that. And you can find people. Let's just look around for a minute. Who would make a really good Secretary of Defense? Now, I don't agree with this gentleman on every point that he makes. And I don't necessarily think he would be a panacea tomorrow morning. But over, say, another 3.5 years, I think he could do a really bang-up job. And that's Colonel Douglas Macgregor.
Okay, so I certainly think that Larry is right with respect to Colonel Macgregor. He would be wonderful as a Secretary of Defense. But I think another person who would be wonderful as Secretary of Defense is Larry Wilkerson himself. So I just wanted to say that.
And he is disposed, or at least he was disposed, to work for Trump. And I understood from different sources that Trump was disposed towards him at one point. I think there's been a lot of alienation created here by what Trump has done and what McGregor has said. But nonetheless, my point is made. There's a sound, analytical, versed deeply in history, especially that history that matters right now, person to be Secretary of Defense. He had the best chairman that he could have had under the circumstances. He fired him. He got rid of him. We need a new one, and we need a good one. I don't think it would be palatable to call C.Q. Brown back, but let's get a good person in there too.
Now, he's talking about the chairperson of the Joint Chiefs, okay, right now. And he regretted the firing of C.Q. Brown, who he viewed, Trump viewed as a DEI hire. Okay, but Larry knew that he was very, very good. Okay. By the way, also, if you're not only thinking of Secretary of Defense, but Secretary of State, Larry Wilkerson would make a great candidate for Secretary of State also. But of course, he's not the only one. Okay, but we'll talk about others. Okay, as we go forward.
He needs a national security advisor who knows what he or she is doing, does not want the press, does not want the limelight, does not want to communicate over signal, and knows the issues in history. There are people like that around too. They are on college campuses. They're at Tufts. They're at Fletcher. They're around. You could pick one. Now you've got to pick one who's going to tell you when you got no clothes on, Mr. Emperor. So that would be very difficult for Trump. Extremely difficult for Trump. Secretary of State. I think there are people around who would make good secretaries of state, both male and female, good people around. Again, some of them are on university campuses.
Yep. And one of them who would, of course, is Jeffrey Sachs. He would be perfect as a Secretary of State. Certainly very, very good. So would Larry, of course. Okay, Larry's been on university campuses too, because he was teaching at, William and Mary. Okay, and is a professor, emeritus there. Okay, but Jeff is still traveling all over the world, going here, going there, representing the United States very well now, even though, of course, he's not in power, okay, in any way. But as an architect of foreign policy, Jeffrey Sachs, in the current world, in the multipolar world, would probably be as good as you can get for Secretary of State. And I don't know whether he would be disposed to Trump. He and Trump would have a terrible time, I think, getting along. But we're talking about who would be good secretaries of state. So there it is.
Some of them are the kind of people you would say have been out there and done this and that makes them qualified, like Jim Baker. Remember Jim Baker, H.W. Bush's? A lot of people thought, well, why is he making Jim Baker Secretary of State? One of the best secretaries of state we've ever had. A mild-mannered man, knew how to do diplomacy, just knew how to do it in his Texas way. There are people like that. Trump doesn't want them. You nailed it. He doesn't want competence to compete with him. And competence would compete with him because he is fundamentally incompetent. It's a natural thing that competence would compete with him. But there are people like McGregor, for example, who at defense would mind his business well at defense, give Trump the best possible advice, probably resign himself if it were existential, and Doug thought it was, and Trump went against that advice, which would be a signal to the American people that the president is nuts. There are people. We are not bereft of people who could form a good cabinet. They're just not the kind of people Republicans and Democrats routinely thrust forward, because the two political parties are broken, utterly utterly broken.
Okay, I thought that direct statement from Larry was really, really wonderful, and really necessary, and tells us the truth about the problems we're having in this country right now, the problems of leadership. Okay, we're having. I think the problems are a great deal in part due to the two political parties and the fact they've been broken by money, broken by big money.
I remember Donald Trump said various times, Larry, in before the presidential election when he was campaigning, he said that the sanctions are killing the United States. The sanctions are killing G7, and they're creating BRICS. But he came to power, and everybody was hoping that he's going to do something. He's the same old sort of strategy, policy, tactic, sanctioning Russia, Iran, and even if I don't know if you saw Pete Hegseth talking about how Japan going to join us to confront China. You see, they're not helping themselves.
No. And Japan, when I was chief of staff to Colin Powell, 2002, I think it was, I'd have to go look down on the wall because it was such a formidable copy of The Economist. They had, The Economist used to be really famous for their covers. This one came in to my office. It was my personal subscription, but I'm looking at the cover and I'm thinking, holy mackerel, has that encapsulated Japan in a photo? And it was a mask. It was a kabuki mask with a tear coming down from its cheek or from its eye across its cheek. And the title, as I recall, overhead was The Sad State of Japan or something like that. They've been in that sad state ever since. They haven't had a decent prime minister, not really. They haven't had a decent policy, not really, international policy or domestic policy. They are disappearing. They are aging themselves out of existence. Japan is a real imponderable in that region of the world right now. There's no reason whatsoever why both Korea and Japan shouldn't have China as their principal economic partner. Not that they should stop dealing with the United States. I'm not saying that, but they should be their principal economic partner. If you look at the stats, China is Korea's, and it's close with Japan. They have wandered into the empire's orbit, and they don't know how to get out, both of them. They think.
Now that is a piece of wisdom, a big piece of wisdom. Because, of course, the natural currents of trade are Korea, and Japan should be looking to China, as they were for most of their history, actually.
And they have convinced at least a small percentage, small in Korea, probably a 50 to 60% percentage in Japan, that's the best possible security relationship on earth, and it shouldn't be changed. They're wrong. There's no need for them to go down with the empire, but they are in a position to do just that, especially if the empire manages to create a war with China. They're not going to win. They're going to lose just as badly as the empire. And the answer to that for Japan is not to go nuclear. That's not the answer. There are people in Japan who think that's the answer. And there are people in Korea who want that to be the answer, but that's because they're looking at a guy across the DMZ who's already got nuclear weapons. We've done this. Nima, we've done this. We've done this to our friends and allies all across the globe. And it's time they grew up. It's time they grew up and became their own man, so to speak, their own woman, whatever the parlance ought to be, their own state, their own country, and do the things that other states do. I'm not saying that we go back into a world where all these little states fight each other all the time, which worries me about Europe. It really worries me about Europe. You look at the history of Europe, and it's real easy to conclude that if we go to an attempt to build a security architecture for Europe that includes Russia, and it fails, and I'd give it a 50-50 chance only of success, then they'll go back to the old ways. We'll wind up with a Europe feuding with itself internally and a real mess. Doesn't have to be, because we all have to confront two huge challenges, and we have to do it together: nuclear weapons and the climate crisis. And both challenges are going to kill us all if we don't handle them well. That ought to be enough pressure, enough existential circumstance, if you will, to keep us from going back to the kind of pre-World War I time, and to make us work together. Work together in a way that China's ASEAN community idea promulgates. We're not in this to fight one another. We're in this to compete strategically, operationally, tactically, but not to fight each other. And may the best man win. And may we all win when it comes to those two threats that might destroy us all. That's the way to look at the future. And there are people in this country who would be a cabinet for Donald Trump who understand that. And Trump has said enough in that direction. He doesn't want a war with China. He wants to deal with China. He said enough in that direction where he should be able to take on a cabinet like that, manage it, let them do the heavy work, which requires good diplomacy, for example, and be successful. But my guess is, and it's an educated, informed guess, he won't. He won't. His bluster and his belligerence, his arrogance will not allow him to. And that's a shame, because there are a lot of people who voted for him who thought there was that prospect.
I don't know if Donald Trump knows what does ASEAN mean. If you remember, Pete Hegseth was asked, what does ASEAN mean? He said, what are the countries involved in ASEAN? He said, Australia? What's going on?
You know, for a person like me who was involved for 5 intense years, actually 6 or 7 if you count my military time, in trying to convince the ASEAN leadership to have a security component and failing, I now look back on that and say, what an idiot I was. What an idiot. Why was I trying to take one of the few organizations in the world that wanted to have nothing to do with armies and bombs and killing people, just wanted to be commercial, just wanted to have good relations, just wanted to produce profits? Why would I have wanted to turn them around and arm them? And yet that was part of my portfolio, to try and convince the ASEAN nations and the ASEAN leadership that they needed a security component. How wrong was I? They are the future.
Do you feel that the strategy is still the same, or they're just revising the strategy?
I don't think we care enough about ASEAN to be doing that sort of thing now. I'm not saying it hasn't fallen off. You know, I told you when I met with that senator in the Senate, I won't say her name. I said her name. There are only so many female senators. Anyway, she said we gave her a briefing on how paltry our efforts would be were we to have to go to war with China. And she had just come back from a tour of the Pacific with military handlers. And she started in her Pentagon provided propaganda. You know, we have surrounded them. We have them surrounded. We have everything around. We have Japan, we have Korea, we have Taiwan, we have Myanmar to a certain extent. At that time, she thought we did. They've had an earthquake now. Maybe she changed her mind, but we have all these people around them. We have the 7th Fleet. We have all these things. We have the Philippines. We have, oh man, we're out there in the Pacific. We're rebuilding this line out there. And I wanted to say, Senator, you're on the Senate Armed Services Committee and you're looking forward to a war with China. And you think we're doing everything possible to win that war. Why am I, as an American citizen, appalled? Do your constituents know you think this way?
War with China would be a recipe for
She's been bought and paid for by the Pentagon in terms of that. I mean, I think we disabused her a little bit. We were supposed to go back for a subsequent briefing to kind of hammer it home. We haven't been invited. That was almost 6 months ago. We haven't been invited back.
Larry, do you think that, just to wrap up this session, Trump administration is feeling, we know that you mentioned that he's playing a game with Iran and maybe with Russia, but what are the consequences of this game? Are they putting pressure on them and convincing them their future is together, is not just the way, because Donald Trump is interested in separating them?
Well, the consequences for Europe, immediate consequences, if there is failure here, is an even more rump Ukraine that will have a hard time even existing. And we'll have cheek and jowl with a very powerful CSTO if we don't do something to adjust the security architecture. I'd like to get rid of NATO, get rid of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, merge them, so to speak, bring Russia into that architecture, and also Washington into that architecture, and have an overhanging European security architecture that we can both back away from, with the possible exception of our nuclear umbrellas, and, you know, say, okay, this is the way we're going to operate from now on. And this is a defensive organization. It's not an offensive organization. So go away, Jens Stoltenberg, and all people like you. But it isn't going to happen. It isn't going to happen. So the best we can do is try to manage it, try to manage the collapse of NATO, try to manage the transatlantic relationship, which might go along with it. Look at what the relationship between our neighbor to the north and us is now, just in a few months. I have good friends in Toronto and Ottawa and Waterloo and elsewhere. I've never heard some of the remarks come from Canadians before, like I'm hearing now. I'm even hearing similar remarks from Australia from people who don't like the current government because of its kowtowing, especially over Gaza, to the current Washington administration. And these people are going to be in control in Australia in a while. And so, you know, we're really damaging lots of things around the world in terms of our relationships. And it's this imperial egg-headedness, wooden-headedness, whatever you want to call it, that we're demonstrating. And Trump promised to the contrary, domestically and internationally, is not living up to that promise. And he's only been in office since January the 20th. People are already concluding that they might have cast their vote a different way. The Republican Party is scared to death right now of what's coming in terms of the midterms and even these special elections. They think they're going to lose quite a few and maybe lose the House.
The market is not doing well.
No, and that too. And these tariffs aren't helping, and the uncertainty they create. I had an economist who I would call John Maynard Keynes' disciple par excellence tell me one time that the factor that one should watch, especially if one weren't an economist like me, I'm not, the factor that one should watch most closely was not stock markets, bond markets, corporate profits, was uncertainty. Uncertainty. When uncertainty reaches a certain point in a population, that's when you have disaster. And we are building that uncertainty brick by brick, day by day, tariff by tariff.
Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Good to be with you. How you doing down there in Brazil? Okay.
Doing great.
Good.
Everything's done.
Sometimes I wish I were down there with you.
Welcome.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay, the two of them developed a very cordial relationship over a particular time. And Solana asked, okay, what I was interested in with that video was the general philosophy towards international relations that Larry expressed in that particular video. And I was interested in the relation of that to what's going on, with respect to Iran. I mean, obviously, Larry, the way his approach to foreign policy is completely different from the way the administration is approaching the Iran problem right now. As I said on a number of occasions already in other streams, it may be that what Trump is doing, with respect to Iran is simply blustering and trying to gain some leverage, but that, he intends to negotiate. But this posturing has involved such an aggregation of military power, to Diego Garcia, that really it looks like, he's going, to attack Iran. And of course, if he had a different staff in foreign policy, different Secretary of State, national security advisor who is different, he would be approaching this but completely differently. And we wouldn't be worried about the possible start of a general war in the whole of West Asia right now. I mean, now we're thinking about, can the Iranians get to Diego Garcia? Can the Houthis, suddenly get to Diego Garcia? Can they do something about the big bombers, stop them, from getting to Iran? Stop them, from any more raids on the Houthis? It just looks like general war is coming closer and closer. And if the Trump administration could shift to the kind of foreign policy approach that Larry was, signaling there, we would be able to avoid a war with Iran and probably settle our differences, fairly rapidly. I'm going to go to your comments now, okay, about that. Earl of Lurl says Larry is great. Yeah, he is a wonderful man. A wonderful man. Sandy Diggs says they were talking on Google. Not sure who you're referring to there, who the they was, Sandy. Evelyn says, loud and clear, the two parties are broken, says Colonel Wilkerson. Nima is so zen, and he has a calming effect. He is zen. He does have a calming effect. He's a genuinely good person. He radiates that. Richard Wolf has been raising the alarm bells about Germany arming itself again. Yes, I know. Is Wilkerson talking about Fisher or Joni Ernst, okay, of Iowa? I don't know. Is Marsha Blackburn, on the Armed Services Committee? I was kind of thinking of her. Lana points out Deb Fischer, okay, is a Nebraska senator. I don't know if he was talking about her. Evelina points out Nima's on the beach down in Brazil. No wonder he's so relaxed. Laugh out loud. I'm not sure which university he's at, but yeah, he seems very, very relaxed. Lana says, no, only those two women. Okay, I looked it up. So they're the only two on the Armed Services Committee then, Lana? So, okay, let us move to our next topic, which was led in a little bit by the Larry video, and that is the subject, okay, of tariffs. So I'm going to present that, okay, on the screen. Okay, and that is Dee's post to take care of. Okay, can you see it, Dee?
Actually, I read the last article.
Okay, so you'd like me to read this?
Sure.
I can certainly do that. Okay. The trade policy we need. Trump's on again, off again tariffs are incoherent, but that should not discredit targeted tariffs paired with investment, as a policy lever. This one is by Lori Wallach. She did this on March 28th, 2025. Okay, it's from the American Prospect. Lori Wallach is a true authority on trade. She's been working on trade analysis for years and years and years. She used to work for, it's the group Ralph Nader founded. I forget the name. In the last couple of years, she shifted over, to the American Economic Liberties Project, which has, there are some very good people over there, including Matt Stoller, who's, an excellent analyst. Lori herself is top notch when it comes to trade. So, this is a photo of a Honda assembly line in Ohio on January 29th, 2025. That looks like an Accord there, a white Accord. And the production line is mixed with electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, and gasoline vehicles. That is scheduled to begin in the second half of 2025. A significant cost from 2 months. Let me raise this a bit. Okay, invisibility. A significant cost from 2 months of incoherent Trump tariff policy could be the broad discrediting of an economic tool that actually can be extremely valuable. The president who cried tariff threats and on again, off again levies, often targeting the wrong countries and goals, have generated unnecessary economic damage and political pushback. That's certainly what has happened. Contrary to what has been drilled into many of our heads, tariffs can be effective. Indeed, some tariff uses are unavoidable if we are to replace a trade regime that had caused real damage to many. She's talking about here in the United States, of course. But will the, quote, reciprocal tariff, unquote, plan the administration plans to unveil on April 2nd be designed to do that? The 25% tariffs on automobiles announced on March 26th hint that we may begin to see a more trade-focused approach to tariff use. But that alone does not a strategy make. Few contest that we have a problem. Being unable to get medicine, masks, car parts, baby gear, and more during the COVID crisis made many more Americans aware we no longer make much here, nor have diverse import sources. Corporate-led hyper-globalization had concentrated production in too few firms, in too few countries, especially China. The breadbasket America has even become a net food importer with food trade deficits in 4 of the last 6 years, reaching a record $39 billion in 2024. We now export soy, corn, and wheat commodities and rely on imports for what we actually eat, including the vast majority of beef, vegetables, seafood, and fruit. That our current trade regime has failed is not news in communities across the nation that thrived when it came to manufacturing. A significant share of it unionized and built the American middle class after World War II. By the mid-1970s, however, specific U.S. government decisions, quite a number at the behest of powerful U.S. commercial interests, began to erode America's productive capacity. Being the world's reserve currency means, unlike the currencies of other countries, the U.S. dollar does not devalue to correct trade imbalances. Instead, an overvalued dollar gives imports a huge advantage over even the most capable U.S. domestic producers, both in the U.S. market and in export markets. That is quite true. That is one of the penalties of being, the reserve, the currency. The push by Wall Street and multinational corporations to deregulate international investment flows facilitated the offshoring of our production to low-wage countries. 1975, the United States slid into persistent trade deficit with the world. By the late 1970s, America was losing manufacturing capacity and jobs, albeit slowly. But in the decades following Congress's enactment of the 1990s North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, World Trade Organization, WTO, and then China's entry into the WTO, the United States lost 90,000 American factories and 5 million net manufacturing jobs, pushing the trade deficit to a record $918.4 billion by 2025. Seeking to avoid just such an outcome, economic populists among Democratic members of Congress led the 1990s fight for balanced trade and against NAFTA and the WTO. Battles, unfortunately, they lacked the votes to win. Unless you spend time in factory towns, it is hard to understand how devastating and lasting the fallout from these trade policies has been. These are our fellow Americans, 63% of whom could not cover a $500 emergency expense, who have an 8-year shortage average lifespan than college-educated Americans, and whose deaths of despair from suicide, alcoholism, drug overdoses have since 2021 decreased overall life expectancy for the first time ever. These are horrifying facts, but your econ professor's voice echoing in your brain tells you that trade deficits are not a problem. Even if some people lose jobs, we all benefit from access to cheaper imported goods, except that the guru of modern trade economics, Nobel laureate Paul Samuelson, revealed in a 2004 paper that its higher wage American jobs, uh, from the machinist jobs, skilled machinists, to union auto and steel workers, to computer programmers, to accountants, began to be offshored. Uh, uh, American workers now lose more in wages than they gain from the cheap imports. As macroeconomic theory predicts, decades of large chronic global trade deficits have both deindustrialized America and fueled income inequality instead of productive investment in making goods in the real economy. We mainly produce dollar-denominated assets purchased with the billions of dollars foreigners earn by selling us imports. This has been extremely profitable for the financialized aspects of the U.S. economy and wealthy investors. It's been a disaster for most Americans. Tariffs can help fix this mess, but only if they are used strategically. One long-standing use with WTO blessing is to penalize trade cheating, such as dumping goods below their costs to produce them, and to countervail the unfair economic benefits of foreign government subsidies to their own producers that would otherwise crush domestic producers in the U.S. The American shrimpers trawling the Gulf of Mexico have tariffs against India, Vietnam, and other countries where shrimp is grown in unsanitary ponds with subsidies and horrific labor conditions. If you do not want solar panels made by forced labor, or believe we should again produce this technology that we developed and then produced until decades of predatory trade practices wiped out the U.S. industry, today 80% of worldwide solar panel production is in China, you'd support the high Chinese solar tariffs that President Biden has imposed. I would not necessarily do that, but of course, what I would do instead would be to subsidize solar panel industries so they could compete with the Chinese. I'd get the hell out of the WTO, and I wouldn't worry about what they think, because they're a neoliberal outfit anyway. I would subsidize all the industries that is important for us to have here. We're a monetary sovereign. We can do the subsidies. We can make our products competitive here. And we can increase our exports in this way. Subsidies can do the work of making us competitive on the world stage again. And we don't have to do tariffs. Going on with the article, but such tariffs must be levied on specific goods and countries on a case-by-case basis after proving damage in a costly and slow process. Even then, enforcement can be circumvented by moving targeted goods through other countries, which then requires filing another case if we're to level the playing field. So again, stop the damage by subsidizing. Then we don't have to worry about systematic trade cheating and overproduction in a center, and or to develop domestic production capacity important to economic and national security. That is, we should worry about that, but we can take care of the problem by subsidizing those industries that are really important to us. Tariffs are sometimes imposed on specific goods from all countries, like the Trump and Biden administration's steel and aluminum tariffs. A related strategy adopted by the Biden administration is to pair the defensive use of tariffs with other industrial policy tools. For example, the Inflation Reduction Act created demand with consumer tax credits to incentivize the purchase of U.S.-made EVs and solar equipment, and stronger Buy American procurement to boost the government purchases. I think that is good policy also. The IRA and the CHIPS and Science Act also incentivize construction of manufacturing facilities with production tax credits and other government inducements for private sector investment. By 2023, the Biden administration's big tariffs plus industrial policy strategy had delivered the highest rate of investment in American factory construction in 30 years. Perversely, the Democrats did not tout this achievement. And now President Trump stands to gain credit when these new plants start hiring, even as he threatens to kill the CHIPS and IRA programs that created those jobs, though he has no plans of his own for industrial policies. Of course, the most controversial tariff use is the process of balancing trade. This requires targeting mercantilist countries such as China, Vietnam, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and Germany that have chronic trade surpluses with the world, some extremely large. These countries employ policies to boost their exports. What are sometimes referred to as Germany's export obsession, 44% of its production is for export, in contrast to 20% in the United States, is promoted by government policies that suppress domestic consumption and target income distribution away from workers and towards the export industries. As well, a significant advantage for Germany is that its exports are denominated in euros, a currency representing a mix of economies of varying strengths, so that it has a significantly lower value than Germany's economic strength would bestow on a freestanding Deutschmark. China is the global leader in, quote, beggar thy neighbor, unquote, policies, combining suppression of wages, and currency manipulation with massive government subsidies for factory land and construction, for electricity and water, and goods shipping to generate huge volumes of goods at unmatchable prices. Decades of trade agreements, lawsuits, and WTO cases have not altered this conduct. The resulting global overcapacity eventually wipes out industry after industry in countries worldwide. After creating and then leading production in microchips, personal computers, and solar panels, the United States produces almost none of these goods, while China floods the world market with them. Today, Mexico, the European Union as a bloc, Brazil, South Africa, and numerous others have tariffs on Chinese imports to address this problem. Again, I think a better way of going about it is subsidizing the industries. Tariffs are needed because it is not possible for global trade deficit countries to export their way to balance. Well, again, why do we need balance? The only reason why we need balance, or why we might need balance in certain industries, is because we need the capacity to build the products of those industries here. But again, I think tariffs are not the best way to gain balance. I think the best way to gain balance is to subsidize those industries freely and seriously, not worry about choosing winners and losers. Every trade policy we have is going to choose winners, okay, and losers. There's no way to stop that. So we might as well deliberately select who the winners and who the losers are going to be through subsidies. The Trump administration seems split on this. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says that the pending reciprocal tariffs plan is about getting other countries to lower their tariff rates. National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett says the plan is meant to raise U.S. tariffs targeting countries with the largest trade surpluses to keep unfair imports out, which will happen. Stay tuned. But if global deficit countries united to raise tariffs on all goods from the global surplus countries, it would force the mercantilists to consume more of what they produce, which would be a win for their own consumers and help to rebalance trade. She's right about that, but it might be hard to get the global deficit countries to unite to raise tariffs, because when you raise tariffs, okay, on all goods, you drive up the prices of those goods. So that's one of the problems with having tariffs at all. Given the size of its economy and its deficit, however, such international coordination is unlikely to come from the go-it-alone Trump administration. I agree with that. Given the size of its economy and its deficit, however, the United States acting alone could force some rebalancing by phasing in tariff on mercantilist countries' imports and adding a surcharge on foreign investment inflows of dollars earned from the import sales. The 2019 bill, sponsored by Senators Tammy Baldwin, Democrat of Wisconsin, and Josh Hawley, who's a Republican from the Show Me State, proposed the latter. Missouri, of course, is the Show Me State. Notably, rebalancing trade and rebuilding our manufacturing, countering trade cheating were not among the stated goals for Trump's tariffs. Instead, he threatened to tariff Denmark over Greenland lust, Colombia over not accepting handcuffed deportees, Canada over imagined undocumented migration, and fentanyl smuggling, and Mexico over real immigration and drug issues. Trump's tariffs have been used to bully allies about non-trade related issues, including Canada, with which we have a trade surplus, sans the crude oil shipped here to be refined in plants in northern U.S. states, even as this administration has ignored global surplus countries with which we have large trade deficits, including Vietnam, Germany, Taiwan, Japan, and Korea. In other words, as usual, Donald Trump doesn't know what he's doing. Tariffs on China made sense, but Trump refused to end the trade scam that allowed billions of dollars of China's imports to evade tariffs. More than 4 million packages of imports ordered online, mainly from China, enter the United States daily, dodging tariffs and inspection. Stopping this flood of e-commerce shipments would also limit trafficking of fentanyl-laced pills and precursor chemicals from China. After closing this, quote, de minimis, unquote, loophole for Chinese goods, Trump reversed course after a White House meeting with the CEO of FedEx, which profits from delivering those packages. Brilliant, brilliant. But even when properly targeted and enforced, tariffs only work if they are predictable and sustained. Companies won't shift import sourcing to new countries, much less invest in domestic production capacity, unless they believe the market for domestic goods generated by protection will last long enough to earn a return on investment. Trump's tariff roller coaster sends the opposite message. She's certainly right about that. Worse, the uncertainty is actually causing damage. Markets are reeling. Retailers are using the mere threat of tariffs as an excuse to price gouge. This device, the most detailed National Bureau of Economic Research study of price impacts of Trump's 2018 China tariffs, showing the tariff costs were covered by the importing companies' reduced profit margins and not passed on to American consumers. Tariffs are charged on a goods wholesale price. So for sneakers that retail at $100, a 25% tariff means a U.S. retailer would pay $6 on top of the $24 wholesale price for the shoes, a cost that could easily be absorbed in the markup. Plus, tariffs alone will not achieve the goals downstream from balanced trade, such as revitalized U.S. Manufacturing and related job creation, or improved uh, um, um, national resilience. Rather than building out the package of industrial policies needed to deliver these outcomes, Trump is focused on killing the CHIPS bill and clawing back the IRA funds. Yeah, because of course, personal animosity towards Biden and his policies. So his feelings of animosity personally have trumped his analysis of what these bills were doing. And for protection to translate into higher wages, not just gains for investors, stock buybacks must be banned in tariff sectors. Okay, and also unionization, okay, has to be easier. After the loss of so many union jobs and related threats to offshore what is left when workers demand better pay, the wage, quote, premium, unquote, for manufacturing relative to non-professional services jobs has declined. As well, balanced trade must be accompanied by enforceable labor standards so that access to another country's markets is premised on workers being guaranteed the rights provided in the International Labor Organization core conventions to organize for unions and bargain for better wages. It also will require strong competition policy enforcement to avoid a wage of corporate price gouging. In 1971, when President Nixon imposed 10% across the board tariffs to force trade balance and currency reevaluation deals, he deployed actual price controls on key products. These non-tariff policy interventions are necessary so corporations that earned record profits under the old trade regime are the ones that pay for the necessary transition rather than workers and consumers. With record low corporate taxes and high profits, they can afford it, but Trump and the GOP-controlled Congress oppose such policies. Instead of criticizing Trump's misuse of tariffs, too many Democrats are attacking tariffs per se as a price-raising menace. CNN and MSNBC repeat this mantra. Mrs. Bad Policy and Bad Politics, as Chris DeLuzio, Democrat of Pennsylvania, recently described in a New York Times piece. Chris DeLuzio is the rare Democrat who increased his margin of victory in 2024 and in a swing Western Pennsylvania district to boot. Not so sure the district is a swing district, but there we go. Many voters like tariffs. In fall 2024 Reuters poll found 56% of Americans nationwide were more likely to support a candidate calling for 10% tariffs. There was another poll found that while 54% of all voters in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Ohio supported expanding tariffs and only 38% opposed it, support was even higher within the working class. 61% of non-college educated voters favored more tariffs, This month, the CBS poll found that a majority of Americans thought the president should focus more on cutting prices, understood tariffs could raise prices, and despite that, still wanted tariffs against China. Indeed, just as NAFTA has become a bad word for many Americans, the word, quote, tariff, unquote, has taken on a symbolic positive value and is understood, quote, as a sign of political solidarity, unquote. Yet another good reason to focus on how Trump proposes to use tariffs, not that he does. I think that part is good advice, that I think across the board opposition to tariffs doesn't make sense. There should be case by case consideration. But of course, I also think that in many cases, subsidies should be used to make our industries competitive as opposed to tariffs. And what I mean by that is government subsidies. In other words, the government should pay for the subsidies. It doesn't need to increase taxes to do that because it can produce the money itself. Okay, the needed money. It would increase our deficits. That's not necessarily a problem as long as it doesn't have an inflationary effect. So, that's my take on this article and part of my take on tariffs and trade. Okay, I of course have much broader views on trade, specifically that trade should always be according to the public purpose, that when we make a trade policy, we should always evaluate it according to the standard of net benefit for the public purpose. But that's the subject of another show, and we have to get on here. So I am going to shift over to your comments, see if there are any more comments. I see our attendance is peaking now. We're at 103 people, and that, okay, is certainly very good. Evelina Pond says, university professors go to the beach too? How can one stay away from some of the most beautiful beaches in the world? Evelina says, isn't Germany exporting less these days? It's exporting less because it has to produce less, and it has to produce less because of the destruction of the gas pipeline, okay, from Russia. But curious to know what the UK exports. I think one thing they exports, okay, are automobiles. Okay, I see an awful lot of Coopers around here, and in Washington, D.C. Elena says, didn't hear anything about tariffs on the UK, did you? I think Trump was going to put some tariffs on the UK. I did hear something about that. I'm not sure how high the tariffs were going to be on the UK, but I think there was some. And Lana says, yeah, Missouri, also known as the state of misery. I used to live there. I never heard the expression the state of misery for Missouri. I've always heard the expression the show me state. Okay, well, let's get to the last of our pieces now. And that is a piece by Mike Brock. And I think it's your turn for that piece, Dee.
Yes, it is.
Okay, Mike Brock is a philosopher.
Okay.
And his blog, okay, is a philosophy blog. but he constantly gets into public issues, and that's what this particular one is about. So
Okay.
please go ahead, Dee.
Oh, you got to put it up on the screen.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you for reminding.
Notes from the Circus, an administrative error. Mike Brock, April 1st, 2025.
And that photo, look, it's police
Mm-hmm.
rescue. New Orleans, Louisiana, USA, March 4th, 2025. A side view of Homeland Security Police.
Mm-hmm.
Special Response Team armored vehicle with Immigration Custom Enforcement Police on the vehicle at the Rex Parade on Mardi Gras Day.
Of course.
It's from Shutterstock.com.
Okay. A man is in a Salvadorian prison right now because of an, quote, administrative error. His name is Kilmar Armando Obrega Garcia. He was in the United States legally with protected status granted by an immigration judge. He has a wife and a 5-year-old child who are American citizens. And now he sits in El Salvador's, quote, terrorism confinement center because someone at ICE made a mistake. The response from our government? A shrug. A filing that says American courts lack jurisdiction to fix this catastrophic, quote, error. A vice president who falsely claims on social media that Mr. Abrego Garcia was, quote, a convicted MS-13 gang member with no legal right to be here. This is not governance. This is performance. Not performance in the noble sense. The acrobat who trains for years to achieve precision, the musician whose discipled practice culminates in transcendent art. No, this is performance as concealment, as distraction, as the magician's flourish that draws your eyes away from the mechanics of the trick. When an American resident with legal status is wrongfully deported and imprisoned in a foreign country, that is not an, quote, administrative error. That language, bloodless, bureaucratic, passive, is itself a performance designed to obscure the moral horror of what has occurred. When officials claim they cannot correct this, quote, error because it would interfere with, quote, a unified course of conduct with the United States foreign affairs, that is not statecraft. It is stagecraft. The elevation of abstract policy aesthetics over concrete human consequences.
Oh, I'm sorry.
When our vice president broadcasts demonstrable falsehoods about a man's criminal history and legal status, that is not communication. It is performance, playing to an audience that values theatrical cruelty over factual accuracy. Hannah Arendt, reflecting on the bureaucratization of evil, observed, quote, the sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. The administrative error, the jurisdictional technicality, the procedural impossibility, these are the costumes that moral abdication wears to make itself presentable. The performative nature of this politics reveals itself most clearly in its inconsistencies. The same administration that claims helplessness before jurisdictional limitations simultaneously asserts vast executive authority in other domains. The same officials who plead procedural constraints when asked to rescue an innocent man boast about their decisive actions when addressing their base. The performance changes depending on the audience, while the underlying moral vacancy remains constant. But here is what the performers forget. A man sits in a cell. A child misses their father. A wife fights for her husband's return. These are not abstractions or staging elements. They are the reality that all this performance is designed to conceal. As the philosopher Albert Camus wrote, quote, "The welfare of the people in particular has always been the alibi of tyrants, and it provides the further advantage of giving the servants of tyranny a good conscience." Today's quote, administrative errors and their bureaucratic justifications serve the same function, allowing functionaries to participate in cruelty while maintaining their self-image as merely doing their jobs. The danger lies not just in the specific injustice inflicted upon Mr. Abrego Garcia and his family. It lies in our collective habituation to this mode of governance as performance, where words no longer connect to meaning, where accountability disappears into jurisdictional crevices, where human suffering becomes an acceptable cost of maintaining the spectacle. 2 plus 2 equals 4. There are 24 hours in a day, and Kilmar Armando Abrega Garcia is in prison because our government put him there, knowingly violating his legal rights, and now refuses to correct its quote error. The center must be held, not because it's easy, but because it is ours to hold.
Okay.
And
So,
this, what's scary is the fact this is just, he's the first of who knows how many.
well, who knows how many of the deportees had rights to stay here?
Yes,
I mean, he is one that comes to the surface. There may have been actually multiple administrative errors there.
exactly.
Okay, how could we tell? There was only one way to tell, and that was to have given the people who were deported rights of due process. What was not
Exactly.
done was to give them due process, to put each one into a court, and each one to be allowed to plead their case that they had a right, okay, to stay here. And also, by the way, not only simply a right to stay here, but even when they didn't have a right to stay here, they had a right to object being sent to this particular notorious prison in El Salvador, and to El Salvador itself rather than to the countries that they came from. They were deported to a prison that is notorious for putting people into slave labor and for torturing those people, for violating their human rights. If the people were given rights of due process, even if they could not have stayed in the United States, at least the judges could have ordered that they be sent to other places that would not have violated their human rights. Due process is so important. I want to emphasize here that due process is the difference between living in a free country and living under fascism or totalitarianism of a different kind. Due process is the key that people get to go to court. Hey, Bonnie, that's making noise. So, anyway, that's the point. We are letting the Trump administration get away without giving people due process. We have to focus on that particular issue. We have to stop them from denying due process to people, all people, however they label these people. And especially, we have to stop them from denying due process to people who are exercising their right of free speech. We must stop that. So, okay, so we probably have some comments. So let's go take a look at those. Sandy says she heard about this. Evelyn says, wonder how many people were picked up due to administrative errors. And Sandy said, but this is really sad. And of course it is. Okay. It's very sad. Have you any comments on this, Dee?
Okay, what I want to say is that this is a dangerous road, because we also heard that they want to put what they call dangerous people that are in that are U.S. citizens
Yes, they do.
over there.
Right. And they want to deny us due process too.
Exactly. It's a very scary road.
It's a very scary road. It's the essence of the dictatorship that Trump, is trying to set up. And if we need to get out into the streets to stop that, then that's what we're going to have to do. Get out into the streets, in the millions. They don't have enough soldiers. They don't have enough police to stop us. They've got only 400,000 people in the military, 440,000 people. Most of them are overseas. And even though there are many police, there are not enough to contain a population that demands change, that demands its democracy. The Trump administration has really crossed a line in sending these people to El Salvador. I think the administration is violating the Constitution in sending them there. I think the deal Marco Rubio did with the El Salvador people to get this done was illegal, and that he ought to be impeached for doing that deal. I think Trump should be impeached for sending people down there and for even contemplating sending Americans down there. Sandy says it's going to be a long 4 years of Trumpism. Only, if we allow it. If we turn the House around soon, to Democrats, I think that's going to put a crimp in it. But also, if we become a lot more active, it's going to put a crimp in it. Now, Trump will respond to that okay, with violence, of course, because that is his way. There will be costs. Okay, I certainly think so. But that's the only way to ensure that we will have something other than a fascist dictatorship during these 4 years. We are in increasing danger of that now. Trump is beginning to indicate his willingness to ignore the courts on a comprehensive basis. We have to object to that. We have to get into the streets over that. We have to get into the streets over so many things he's doing. It's not funny. And of course, right now, his foreign policy, which had some promising elements, is tending towards disaster. Okay, if he bombs Iran, he will create a general war, in West Asia. The Russians and the Chinese will support their clients in West Asia, and we don't know we can't tell what the limits of the expansion of that war will be. It could easily become the World War III that we all want to avoid. Sandy says, I agree with that, Joe. Lana says, how long can this administration go on pissing off a whole lot of people, including their own supporters? How about Cory Booker speaking on the Senate floor for about 20 hours? How about that? I think that's great. It's too bad he's not joined by 50 other senators, or at least 47 other senators. Why don't they all go on filibusters for that many hours? Of course, if that happens, what the Republicans will probably do, is to get rid of the filibuster. In the long run, that will be better if they get rid of the filibuster. There are other ways to tie up the Senate as well. I think the lesson there is that all the Democrats have to do everything they can to tie up the Senate until the Republicans begin to behave as if they care about the United States and its future. Saying it's a lot of people have been protesting in the streets. They're so fed up what's going on. I'm going to go to a protest on Saturday. Thank you, Sandy. Bernie is always saying something, not for 20 hours straight, though. Well, Bernie has filibustered before for quite a number of hours. Whether he can do it now for 20 hours straight, I don't know. But I know he and AOC are going out to California this weekend, and are going to be having some big events out in California this weekend. And I'm sure they'll draw very large crowds out there as well, and that those will be quite outstanding. Okay, Dee, is there anything more to say tonight?
We're keeping our eyes on Iran right now, and we'll see tomorrow what more's going on,
Yes.
how things are moving forward.
Yeah, well, of course, in Iran, it's already tomorrow.
Yes, it is.
Lana says, it's too bad the establishment Democrats waited for the second Trump term to start the fight. Yes, it is too bad. It's too bad they didn't start fighting the Biden administration over its foreign policy. Had they done so, they might not have had a second presidency of Donald Trump. Sandy says Corey holds the record now for the longest record for filibustering. Okay, I guess that is something. Okay, any further comments?
Tomorrow I will have a show at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, or 9:15 p.m. Eastern Time. And you're welcome to join me, Joe.
Okay, thank you very much, Dee. I don't know if I'll be able to make it for tomorrow. I'm needing some more time, in the middle of the week, to do some other business. And that is coming up for this week. So I don't think I'll be available on Wednesday.
Okay.
I'm not even sure that I'll be available on Thursday. But I have to see about that.
Well, you usually have a show at 8 p.m. on Thursday, don't you?
Yes, I usually have a show at 8 p.m. on Thursday. I don't know if I'll be available for that.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I'll be back for sure on Saturday.
Okay.
I may be back on Thursday, but I'm not sure about that. But for tomorrow night, I can't be back.
Okay.
So Lana says, one more thing. Lana says, my governor walks to the town hall in Texas with Beto. Yeah, he's starting to do some good public stuff, Tim Walsh says. At first, I scoffed. I listened to it, and it was very good. Tim Walsh is very good. Sandy says, I think I saw some of that, Lana. They called out the Democrats, and they praised Bernie and AOC. Yeah, I think Bernie and AOC deserve some praise at this point. I think they're really beginning to resist, and the crowds are responding. So everybody, good night for now. And I'll see you as soon as I can get back.
All righty. Good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Okay, good night, Dee, and thank you very much for coming. And also thanks everybody for being here tonight. Our top attendance for tonight, according to the indicator we have, was 103 people, and we now are at 101. So
Ooh.
for us, that's a very good total. And we'll probably find out more when we look at the official figures from Facebook and from Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I should say from X.
X. I know, right?
Right. Okay. And from YouTube, we'll probably find it's much in excess of 101. So thanks, everybody. Sandy says, yippee. Well, thank you, Sandy. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.